Hello, guys. On this episode of Spec with Seth, we're going to be finally talking about the frequency response and what that even is. Basically, the frequency response is going to be referring to, well, for microphones, the range of frequencies a microphone can pick up. And then for headphones, it's going to be the range of frequencies a headphone can reproduce. So that's a frequency response. But in terms of the frequency range, we as human beings can only hear from 20 hertz all the way up to 20,000 hertz or 20 kilohertz. And because of this, there's actually a lot of sounds that are not really important for recordings. So we'll talk a little bit in depth about how those correlate on the digital end. But for now, even though we are going to be exploring a software, you don't need to know the software. You just need to know the numbers and the ranges for these three kinds of frequency bands. We're going to be paying attention to the high frequencies, the mid frequencies, and the low frequencies for this basic video. So let's go over to our software here so that we can take a look at our frequencies. So you can see here, there's a lot of things being active, a lot of things moving around, and don't be scared. These are just basically what the microphone's picking up, and it's me. It's my voice on a digital scale. Wow, it looks so amazing. It's interesting and spectacular. So we're going to be looking at this. I've been talking for quite a while, so that's why this kind of like blue line that I'm following with my mouse has appeared, and it isn't really moving anywhere. It's become very stable. This is basically what my microphone, the Shure SM7B, has been recording, and this application here allows me to see all these frequencies being excited and moving around as I'm talking. It looks kind of disorientating, but the only things that we really want to focus on are actually the numbers that are all the way at the bottom. Starting from the bottom left-hand corner here, you're going to see that there's going to be these numbers between 0 and 31. Now, know this. That's not actually truly 0. This is actually 20 hertz, or, well, in terms of what the software says over here on the top. If I point my mouse cursor all the way down, you'll notice it turns to a 20.2 hertz. So we're exciting frequencies all the way down to 20 hertz. And that makes sense because this microphone can only listen or record all the way down to 20. As soon as I move my mouse cursor all the way over here, you'll see that this is as far as I can reach. But the number over here at the top, you're going to notice that when I move my mouse cursor down there to the bottom right-hand corner, we're exciting frequencies all the way up, even to that 19.7 kilohertz. So cool. We can identify that this microphone is exciting frequencies all around the band, but you can also see too that it's exciting frequencies more than others. And why is that? Well, let's go into the snip tool and find that out, shall we? So we're going to switch over scenes, and we're going to take a look-see at the snip tool where I took a picture of the full graph without this moving all over the place. So you can see here on this graph, there's going to be that solid line that you're following along with. And I'm going to be using 3 colors. I'll use green for the low end. And that's going to go all the way up to 250. Then I'm going to be using orange. This is going to be our mid-range, all the way up to around 5,000, I would say. And then we're going to use the color red to talk about all of those highs. So we have the highs all the way to the right here. Oh, I know how to spell. And then we have the mids, or the mid-range, in orange. And then all the way over there on the left in green, we have the low end. And basically, in general, these frequency bands, because they're not specific frequencies, they're just covering all of these frequencies. These all correlate with certain aspects of sound and also as aspects of your voice. So the low end here correlates with bass. But not only does it correlate with bass, it can also correlate with breaths. And it can also correlate with handling noise. So that's like when you bump the boom arm. Now, in terms of the mid-range, this is going to be where the voice lives. It's going to be anywhere from around 3,000 to 5,000 hertz. It can also kind of extend to 8,000, but we're just going to keep it nice and simple. This is going to be where your voice lives. And we're going to give it a little star. And now the highs, these are going to be very interesting. This is going to be anything that has to do with breaths as well. I mean, breaths can be caught on like all of the ranges, but they're more significant in the highs and the low end. So breaths are going to be here, plosives. You're also going to hear wind. Wind noise is also going to be caught up here. Other things like we talked about breaths and plosives, wind. It's going to be kind of weird, but up here would also be air, just in general. Anything that you think of as air frequencies that are not generally making sounds, that's kind of like where that lives. You can kind of also think of it as instruments. You can imagine that hi-hats live up here on a drum kit. And then the mids, that's going to be something like your snares. And then for the low end, you can think of that as the bass drum. So with all of that being said, what matters most to take away from this is now that we've identified like where things are here, we can take a little closer look now at my voice. Because if this is like where my voice lives, what is all of this stuff over here? These are actually, these are all due to just the sound that naturally occurs when you're making noise with your mouth. So we're going to be using a yellow line here to give us a little average. So this actually normally would be flat, but I have a filter activated. So when I move the microphone, it's not noticeable, which like I've said before, handling noise, I minimized it. So in reality, the microphone would look more like this, like that little graph. We're going to go over what we've written. And it goes all the way there. So my curve will look something like this. And over here, like in this little area, that's actually where other parts of your voice live. And it's kind of weird to explain this in a basic video, but I feel like these are important. These are going to be things like nasal sounds. And also mouth noises as well can also live here. And you can kind of hear other intricacies of the voice. Where there's this kind of like big hump. And this big hump also is kind of due to the microphone. So it can be based off of just the way the microphone was designed. It could also have this this little hump here. So it could be out of your control. And because we know this now, we can now try to decipher which frequencies are kind of important and which frequencies are not. And we can base this off of the mid range, those highs, or those low end. And this is where the voice lives, but it's actually manipulating these frequencies over here. And we're going to circle those with a purple. It's these frequencies over here that we need to change sometimes if we want to have a different voice in terms of the body or the low end and the impact. We can actually change these frequencies over here. Or we can change the brightness of our voice by changing the frequencies over here. So that's kind of important to also note. And it's super weird. You would think that the brightness would be manipulated with the highs over here. But the thing is, the voice actually doesn't really typically go that high. It's really interesting, especially since I'm a low speaking person. I have a low register. It makes sense that my hump is going to be occurring a little bit lower. Some other voices may have the hump that's a little bit higher, and especially for females, it might be like right over here. I'll zoom in to the numbers. It might be around 500 or that 1000 that you'll see the hump. Compared to me, where my voice is so low, you'll see the hump occur between that 100 or 250 range, where the low end just about stops. And the reason why these are like specific values, like the low end is 20 hertz all the way to 250. And then the mid range is everything from 250 all the way up to around 5,000. And then the highs is everything above 5,000 and beyond, is actually just because these are going to be the main frequencies that are going to be affecting the voice. These right here are the main ones. Like this is your voice. Like how it sounds, the timbre of it, the uniqueness, the qualities. These are all you. Makes you unique. But then everything in the highs is going to be things that you don't really have complete control over. So you never think about it. And that's the reason why I'm going to color it in as red. Orange is kind of important to maybe touch but don't touch if you're going to be doing EQ. Because if you really manipulate these, you won't really hear that much of a noticeable difference because your voice is just your voice. But again, it's those purple circles that matter the most when you're changing some things around with EQ. So over here, I just have to mention brightness. So you can make a voice more bright, or they also say airy. If you do some boosting over here and manipulate this, adding a little hump like you would over here in the low end. And then this low end here, I would also color this red. You actually don't want to be touching the low end too much, but I'm actually going to make this fade into a green because there's some areas where you might benefit from changing a little bit of the low end. And that typically occurs right between over here and here. And that's exactly where this purple circle is starting to begin. And that's why it's kind of important to have that there. So it'd be nice to change these frequencies around a little bit because it can benefit your voice. And it would be very good for you to experiment and to see what works for you. So as confusing as this gradient kind of looks like, you typically don't want to be touching the mid-range unless you want to experiment with your voice, and this is only going to happen in post-process unless you have a means of changing EQ for when you're talking live. The highs you're not going to touch at all, and don't really touch the highs, but sometimes in between the highs and the mid-range, you might be able to give yourself a little bit of a bright boost if you do touch the frequencies in between there. And then over here, you're going to see that purple circle again, and you'll see that color gradient change. It's going to be nice to kind of change this around if you really want to affect the warmth or the darkness of your voice. So whenever these are boosted, it may sound very, very dark, and that's actually very, it's very reflected actually also in the microphone, the mic hump by design. This could just be here because the microphone's dark to begin with. So if this is super duper high, it might be very, very warm or the microphone might just be attenuating the bass frequencies more, or your voice might just be very bassy to begin with. So you may want to lower this for clarity, or you may want to increase it for warmth. But don't do a lot of boosting or cutting when you're doing your EQ. I know that this looks like it's a lot, especially you following that yellow line all the way up and down. But even though it looks like it's very, very big, small changes can mean a lot in the end. And speaking of the end, the low end is what you don't want to be touching at all, just like the highs. There's not going to be very noticeable gains here, because basically what you'll be doing when you're boosting is you're going to be boosting the air frequencies, the breaths and the plosives, the wind. I might as well circle the whole thing. So as soon as you start to boost these up, you're going to be also boosting these boys up too. And then for the low end, the bass might be nice to kind of increase, but the breaths are something we're not looking for, and the handling noise is something that we don't want to be captured. Even things like footsteps can also be captured on a microphone because it's all vibrating in the low end. So you don't want to be increasing the low end, or else you'll also be increasing noises you don't want. So that's why, in terms of like what's important, I know there's a lot on the screen. I'll try to Control Z all this away, but what's really important is over here, this overarching kind of shape. This is all the stuff you want to care about. All of this. Everything above it, you can care a little bit about it, but you don't necessarily need to. It's just going to be all the way from like 100 to typically 6,000. Sometimes you can go up to 8,000, maybe even 10, but all of those stuff you don't want to be boosting. And the only reason why you don't want to is because of those plosives and breaths. And the same thing in the low end. You don't want to be boosting either, because it'll be boosting noises that you don't want in your recording. So hopefully this was kind of useful to get a general idea of EQ and where things are located. It's a very confusing topic, and this will be one of the videos that take the most time, but it's kind of easy to go through it very slowly and to explain it on this very, very basic level. So that way, don't touch the mid-range too much, but between the mid-range and the high range, I can maybe experiment with. And then for the low range and the mid-range, you don't want to touch the low range too much, but it's in between the low range and the mid-range that I can experiment with. So hopefully this was useful when you start to decide to EQ your voice and make some changes, see if you can make improvements to the voice, because again, all microphones have a different truth, and sometimes the truth that the microphone is recording is completely wrong. So we have the ability to manipulate sound and change it to our liking. So hopefully this was useful to get a general idea of how frequencies correlate with the sounds that we make with our voice.